Hello, 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 and welcome to the final class in your free training and the final class in this unit, which is where I share my 4 steps to actually healing and processing our triggers at the root. So in the last class, I talked about what triggering is, what it's not, what type of triggering I'm referring to, and how we become disempowered through our triggers. And now I'm going to actually teach you how to step back into the passenger seat of your own experience and become empowered through actually healing these triggers at the root cause. And this is through 4 easy steps, which you will have a worksheet on in the files section, okay? So the best way to heal your triggers is to understand where they originate from and releasing unhelpful narratives that were created around the experiences that created your current triggers. So we've been doing that work already. We've already been looking at these narratives. We've been rewriting new stories. We've been interrupting thought patterns with mantras and affirmations. We've been interrupting old behavioral patterns by creating new habits and behavior that are serving to our goals. We've gotten clear on all of these things now. So now it's time to take that information around your triggers and actually work with it in this process and release it, releasing the narratives that created it, releasing the trigger. I'm sorry, I'm having such an issue with my eye. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So as with all the processes I've shared with you for working through your shadow work, you'll find a workbook with this as well. And if you're watching this within the group, go to the files section. If you're watching this on the free training, go to the files section on the website page. And that's where you're going to find the information you need, the worksheet you need, and the workbook for this unit. But there is a worksheet to guide you through this. So let's break it down, guys. Step 1 is to, again, identify the triggering situation, which you've already done. Hopefully I've had you guys contemplating. If you're in the membership, you've done your blueprint, you have your blueprint there to work with. So you've made this identification of what are my triggers. And now with that awareness, you can begin working through what you've identified one thing at a time. And you're going to notice each time I walk you through these processes, you're meant to only deal with one theme, one trigger, one story at a time, not to try to tackle it all. This is not a race, so there's no sense in rushing through these processes. The slower, more intentional that you are about these processes, the more that you are going to successfully integrate these and embody these in your everyday living, okay? So everything always starts with awareness. Now, as you observe new triggers showing up for you, because there's always new stuff, right, being presented to us. There's always external stimulation and stimuli coming in that are going to create new triggers we didn't even realize we had, or new experiences are going to lead us to new triggers. It's nice to keep a running note of those somewhere in a journal, in a notebook, on your phone and notes, whatever it is. So then you already have a place to start with. You have your little list of triggers, you have the awareness, and you can start working through them using these steps. So awareness is key. And when you have the awareness before you're actually confronted with a trigger, you've given yourself a little bit of a leg up because you already can have a plan in place. You understand the trigger, you knew it was going to happen. Now that you're in the trigger, you already created a action plan, a game plan at a time when you weren't triggered because of your awareness of the trigger. So awareness, always the first key. And sometimes we can become aware like of things that we know trigger us. And sometimes we discover these in the triggering moment, but the more awareness that you can have ahead of time, the more that you're going to have your toolbox ready. You're going to know exactly what tools you're going to use to deal with that trigger in the moment. You're going to self-regulate, all of these things. So awareness is first, but let's say we're confronted with something triggering, okay? The next step And how do we know we've been triggered? Because we feel it. We feel angry, sad, depressed, rage, all of these things. We feel the shift. We're aware. We're tuning into our emotional shifts. We're becoming more and more aware through these processes. We are observing ourselves, right? So we notice these emotional shifts and we recognize it as a trigger. The first thing you're going to do is you are going to move that energy out. Now, yes, our emotions are important and we do deal with our emotions, and I have a whole unit on dealing with our emotions. So this isn't about bypassing how you feel. But here is the thing. Here is the biological and scientific truth. When you are highly triggered and activated, your ego and your brain is and your body is responding as if your life is in danger. Everything you think and feel and react to in that moment is going to come from a place of ego telling you that your life is in danger. And even more so, what happens on a biological level when we're experiencing triggering is this frontal part of the brain is deactivated to some capacity. And that part of the brain is in charge of planning, problem solving, logic, decision making. And this back part of the brain, which is a more ancient and primal part of the brain, this front part developed through evolutionary processes. This back part of the brain, where the fight or flight, freeze or fawn, all of those things we hear about when we're talking about these trauma responses, they live in that part of the brain. It's the oldest, most ancient part of the brain that's been around since we've been around, necessary for our survival as a species. So there's no knock against it. But when we become activated in that part of the brain and deactivated in the part that is in charge of that logic, decision making, planning, and all of those things, we become disempowered through that because we are no longer responsive. We are now reactive, and we're reacting from a state of mind and a state of being in our body that tells us we are in physical death and immediate danger. And we do not act from a place of reasonableness when we are highly triggered. So you are never going to be able to heal a trigger until you first regulate the nervous system in that trigger. And a really great way to do that is to physically move it out, whether you shake it out, dance it out, jump it out, scream it out, walk it out, run it out, punch a pillow. It does not matter. Move your body, move energy in some way to actually move that energy, those heavy emotions out of the body, so that you can actually look at your trigger from a realistic and objective perspective. And when I say realistic, what do I mean? A realistic perspective is knowing that your child throwing a temper tantrum is not a threat to your life. It's just annoying, okay? And it also allows you to then look at, like, why are they throwing this fit? What needs do they have that aren't being met right now? So it enables us in that scenario to actually be a better parent, rather than just feeling triggered and being like, I'm really mad right now and my feelings are valid and I'm valid and I'm not going to ignore my emotions. None of that is about any of this. But I promise you, you cannot move forward in an empowered way when you are thick in those heavy emotions that are the byproduct of you subconsciously believing that your life is in danger, because your life isn't in danger. And therefore, those heavy emotions associated with it aren't always going to be valid. They're usually an overreaction. Okay? So that's really important for you to understand. So moving it out regulates the nervous system and allows you to now actually explore that trigger from a higher perspective, from your highest perspective, from your most regulated perspective, from your most grounded perspective, and most importantly, from the most realistic perspective that there is, instead of this false narrative of fear and danger that your body is now reacting to in that way. So after you've moved out the energy, it's time to really get clear on the triggering situation. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's time to really get clear on the emotions that you are having and that you might still be sensing around that. So you've identified the situation, you've moved the energy out of the body, and now you're going to sit there and contemplate. Did it make you angry? Did you experience rage, frustration, depression, sadness, anxiety? What was the emotion that was associated with that trigger? Just to bring further clarity, because the more awareness we have about what's connected to what, again, this is all about connecting those dots. Um, and the more understanding you're going to be able to use as you move forward, the more you have available to you to utilize as you process the trigger. So you've gotten clear on the emotions that are attached to that trigger. And the next step is to ask yourself why you experienced that particular emotion around this triggering situation. What desire, need, or wound is beneath the trigger? So the reason why I say desire or need, often when we are triggered, it's because our needs aren't being met. The same way as the same example I used with like a 2-year-old throwing a tantrum, because their needs aren't met, we do something very similar when when we are trigger activated. Okay, we also throw our own adult versions of temper tantrums, and we lash out and we say and do things that are not in line with our integral belief system. We have our own version of throwing an adult temper tantrum. So often that is because we have needs that aren't being met. Are we not being heard by someone that's important to us? Do we feel like we're not being heard? Because remember, our perception isn't always reality. It's just our perception based on our belief system. But I digress. These are things you want to get curious about. So we're going back to getting curious. Why are you feeling these things? What needs aren't met? What wound is this trigger attached to? And I'll give you an example from my own life about this. Just to help bring clarity to what this could look like. But there was a time in my life when anybody, and we see this so much more now, but we didn't have TikTok when I was dealing with this particular trigger. It was really just Facebook and Instagram, but no, Instagram wasn't what it was today. It was really people putting their personal pictures up. It hadn't become what it is today. So it was mainly just on Facebook. And I would see these women in this one particular spiritual group I was in just dancing all the time, braless dancing. And I would just get so mad. It would just irk me. Um, and I would say I'm still dealing with some of this triggering for a different reason, not the dancing, but as I was sharing this, I started thinking about a current trigger I have, which is when people cry and literally like take pictures of themselves crying or like videotape themselves crying. And I don't know why it bothers me, something for me to explore, but it really does. It irks me. But anyways, getting back to this original thing, it used to be the dancing that used to irk me. Now it doesn't bother me at all. I love it actually. I watch people dance all day on social media, but it used to just bother me, and I would start judging these people. What a narcissist. Oh my gosh, how much attention does this woman need? Look at her, like just attention seeking. I formed all these judgments, right, around the type of person who would do such a thing. And when I really started to do this work and I had to start looking at these triggers, what I realized is that for someone to show up so authentic without a care in the world on camera and be themselves, it triggered me because I was so ashamed of the person that I was and so afraid of who I was. There was a time when I really believed I was such a bad person that I was so terrified to look at myself. But I've learned better now. But all of these things were blocking me from ever showing up my authentic self. So when I saw somebody else who was so empowered to be able to show up in such a vulnerable and authentic way, it triggered that wounded part of me that, truth be told, also wants to show up in an authentic and empowered way, but was too afraid of who I really was, too afraid that people would see who I really was, that people would see that I was a bad person, a horrible person, not someone of value or worth. None of those things, and now here I am getting emotional again, but none of those things which are actually true. But when I trace that trigger back, instead of just being in that reactive state and saying these women are narcissistic, attention-seeking people who do all this crap to get attention, I realized, oh, this has nothing to do with them. This has everything to do with the fact that deep down, I desire the same for myself, but I'm too afraid for it. Too afraid to show up authentically. Now, obviously, in that realization, that gave me a whole list of other things that I needed to begin working on, a whole other stream of narratives that needed to be rewritten. And that's how many of these things work. Discovering one thing leads us to another, leads us to another, leads us to another, and deeper and deeper and deeper we go. But This is an example of how our own personal wounding, our own narratives, our own needs not being met can create triggering within ourselves. Okay. So we want to get curious and be really honest. We have to quiet the ego. The ego is going to want to blame other people. Well, she makes me feel that way, or whatever. He makes me feel that way. This makes me feel that way. And I've already really touched on that in other classes. No, 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 nothing makes you feel anyway. You are making choices, whether you're consciously aware or subconsciously not aware. But best believe and bet on it, you are making the choice of how you are feeling in every given moment, with the exception, and it's not even with the exception, it's just some things cut so deep that we need to feel all the emotions. The loss of a loved one, we're not talking about stuff like that. I'm talking about specifically when we are triggered by these things that are outside of our control, which death is, but you guys know what I mean. I'm talking about these little everyday frustrations that cause us to make judgments or whatever it is that create this triggering. Okay. We are in charge of how we feel, nobody else. And if you're giving that to anyone else, you've already misstepped in that. So that curious part, another great question to ask yourself is, what is this showing me about myself that I'm not seeing? And doing that automatic writing process, if you're having a hard time getting to the root core of what it is, using that automatic writing tool and writing that question at the top of your page, what is this trigger showing me about myself that I'm not aware, and allowing that information to come forward. um so this is another great way that stream of consciousness writing can really help. And again, you have worksheets and workbooks to help work you through these processes as well. So don't feel like you need to frantically be taking notes. Just when you're finished, make sure you get to the file section and get the accompanying material that goes along with this. That's going to walk you through it. Okay. Um, so we're looking at, as I said, what we're not seeing, we're getting curious. And then we want to look at what originating experience did this trigger stem from? When did I first start feeling this? What was happening in my life when I first started experiencing this trigger? And that's going to give a lot of insight into why you're specifically triggered, what that specific wound is, what needs not being met, etc. And the answer to this may not come to you right away. Okay. You might have to sit with this for several days before the clarity really comes through. But just remember, guys, there's no rush with any of this. So be patient with yourself and be patient with these processes. All right. So I know this has been a lot of information and an intense unit. I've thrown so much at you in this unit and in this free training, but the good news is time isn't limited. So you have these classes to revisit over and over again. You have these resources available to you to continue using. So I'm saying this because I do not want anyone to feel overwhelmed with any of this. Okay. There's no sense for being overwhelmed or feeling overwhelmed. Just take it step by step and allow what comes through to come through at its own pace, and just be open to receiving without judging yourself, without feeling guilty or shame or shrinking away in shame. Just be willing to accept what it is and meet yourself where you're at with love and compassion. And that is going to be the number one tool that you have with any of your shadow work journey. So move at your own pace, but just keep on moving. So I want to thank you for being here today. And this concludes the 7-day free training. And if you're watching this within the group already, this concludes your unit training. Make sure and find all your materials. And thank you so much for joining me.